morning. I'm Ben Wright, and I am indeed honored to be interviewing John, better known as Jack Kerr, who is a U.S. Army veteran who served in the U.S. Army in Europe during the Cold War in the early 1950s. It was during the Korea conflict, but we actually had another war going on in Europe with the Cold War, of which Jack was a part. So, Jack, we're delighted to have you with us this morning.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Good. Well, how did you wind up in the Army?
Well, there we go. I graduated from college in June of '51, and I was all set to go to work for Liberty Mutual Insurance Company as a claims adjuster. And while I was in training for that, a gentleman from the Army Recruiting Service came to my parents' home on the north side and said, if your son doesn't sign up for in this case, the Army Security Agency, which is what I ended up in, or be drafted into the Marine Corps, the choice was simple. So I promptly enlisted, went through the normal basic training kinds of things at Fort Knox, New Jersey, or Fort Knox, Kentucky, then to ASA school. And the Army Security Agency, virtually everybody that was ever in that had to go through the Army Security Agency school at Fort Devens, Mass. And it was basically Morse code learning. That got to be a little trying for a lot of people, not just me. So I figured, let's go to OCS, get commissioned, and at least be in the unit. You're still in the ASA, but a little, making a little bit more money. So I went through OCS at Monmouth, got my commission, still in the ASA. And then the deal was that everybody pretty much ended up at Fort Devens and into other places literally around the world. And in my good fortune, well, back up, there were 14 brand spanking new lieutenants that stood in front of an Army personnel officer by the name of Betty Rogers at Fort Devens, and all didn't want to extend. That was the option we had. We could go another 18 months or be reassigned. Betty said, if you don't do this, you'll be reassigned anywhere. 14 of us said, no, thank you. Some went to Hawaii, some went to Korea, some went to Asmara in Ethiopia, which happened to be an Army security base. And fortunately, yours truly and 4 or 5 others went to Europe. In Europe, we were divided up basically into 2 companies. One called her, I can't remember the number on it, but it was down at group headquarters in Heilbronn. And then the other one was at the 331st Recon Company in Germany, or in Gießen. Now, before I ever was involved in this thing, the powers that be determined that in order to get good Russian low-level intercept work, it had to be geographically better done in the British zone of Germany than we were in America, than we were in down around Gießen and Frankfurt and so forth. So this is where the story starts. On June the 2nd, my first command was 6 corporals that were all graduates of the Army Language School in Monterey, California. In what language? Russian. So what happened on June the 2nd of 52, excuse me, I was given a sergeant, a cook, 6 corporals, a 2.5-ton truck, dragging a power unit behind it, and off we went to investigate whatever we could find in the British zone of Germany, because geographically and topographically, it was a better place to intercept communications. Now, the deal was that if we ever found a good place, this is in June. Later in the month of July and probably through the summer, there would be a field unit come in and set up a semi-permanent summer encampment that we would do this. So what happens, off I go with my 7 people and me into the British zone, and with maps and so forth. And our job was to find what we thought would be good intercept sites. And then we do this by listening, obviously, with my Russian language speakers. And we probably spent the best part of 3 weeks going up and down the east coast or east-west border. Now, if you'll remember, we were talking at one point, and I was telling you about the east-west border being basically a plowed strip of land that ran right through the countryside with barbed wire fences on both sides and with border guards and all of that. So what we had to do was go into the woods as far or as close as we could get to that and set up our little radios and so forth. Well, we sent back, I think it was 5 or 6 locations that would be adequate, more than adequate for the summer. And it just so happened that these reports went through a gentleman, a lieutenant reserve by the name of, oh golly, I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, he was a survivor of the Bataan Death March in World War II, or early World War II. And he kept telling me what good reports these were. And I said, well, that's what you sent us up there to do. Well, to make a long story short, they decided on one location that was kind of close to all of these. And an engineering company come up and in 2 days set up a complete new roads, electric, everything, sanitary facilities and all that, but it was in the British zone. I have to back up one thing. When they sent me up into the British zone to look for these places, they said, be sure you check in with British Army headquarters in Hanover to let them know that you're in the area, just courtesy more than anything. So on June the 2nd of 1953, I knock on the door at British Army headquarters in Hanover. It's locked up tighter than a drum because June 3rd was Coronation Day for Queen Elizabeth. So there was nothing but partying going on. Anyway, off we go into the summer, so to speak, to do what we can to find out what we can from the backside. In the process, I found out, I didn't know at the time that we went in there, there was a British Royal Signals unit in their zone, of course, that I wasn't expecting to run across. Well, I developed 2 very close friendships during that short summer. One was a gentleman named Pat Walker, Major Pat Walker, a Sandhurst graduate, and his lieutenant, Andrew Robertson, a Scot. Well, he was doing the same thing I was doing, but in a different area of the countryside. But he and I and Andrew became very good friends over several beers and luncheons and so forth, all out in the woods, because we were, not near any, well, we were close to cities, but we never went anywhere near them. But I want to bring up 2 incidents that were sort of typical of what was going on, at least with my crew of people. My sergeant, and I bless him to this day, Billy Bennett, was the archetype staff sergeant in the United States Army. He could do anything. And one of the things they did extremely well was string antennas. So anytime that we got to one of these locations, we needed antennas. Billy would squirrel up a tree and string an antenna. two things. One night, we were very close to the border, and we were in the backyard of a house, the front yard of which was in the east zone. The backyard was in the west zone. Now, I don't know how that happened. And make a long story short, Billy strings the antenna on a tree in the backyard. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, we heard noise in the front yard, and somebody took a shot at us. And the bullet went through the canvas covering on the back of the 2.5-ton truck. So I reported it back to Geese, and the rest, nothing ever happened. The other one is even more interesting. Right about the time we were ready to go back for the summer, or back into Geese and the summer program being completed, Billy and I, now I'm sorry, it wasn't Billy, one of my other corporals. We were in a village called Bardorf. And Bardorf was about as big as maybe 2 or 3 football fields, total square footage. But it was right smack dab on the border. But the downtown, quote unquote, was in our side. So we're in, this is about 9 o'clock in the evening. And we were in the, what would amount to the bar of this little guest house that we were in. Sitting there just quietly having 2 beers. And who comes in but 2 Russian border guards? And I'm thinking, now what do we do? And we didn't have to do anything, because they said the same thing to themselves. They sat over there and we sat over here, and there was never any communication except glares. We just glared at each other. And that was, you know, the extent of my contact, direct contact with the bad guys. Now, one something that I found out later. Now, after that, very quickly, within a couple or 3 months, I was out of the Army because the Korean armistice was signed, and the Army wanted to get rid of company grade officers. And in under 90 days, I was back home, and I got out of the service 9 months before I was supposed to. But I was going through all this is several years later, and online there was some information, or it was a letter from a gentleman from the same unit back to his girlfriend in the States, and they were spending the summer, the whole unit, like my whole company, in Bardorf. In other words, we found the place, and they liked it so much, the signal strength were so good that they went back to it. And that's pretty much, you know, after that, I was on my way home and being a civilian again. But that's my story.
Oh, wonderful, Jack. Well, a couple things. How busy was the radio traffic? Were you intercepting a good amount?
A fair amount, yes. It was hard to do. I mean, it was, a radio signal from their side would fall into the ground about 10 feet beyond the transmitter, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes,
they
sir.
were very, very weak. Now, we didn't copy any air traffic. Air traffic was coming in, you know, easily. I mean, there was nothing to block it, and it was a different frequency. But no, well, we got some, but I mean, it wouldn't be enough to start a war or anything like that, I don't think.
So were you working several frequency ranges? Were you primarily working high frequency HF and
We
low
were
frequency, or
primarily,
did you get into the other frequency ranges?
you got me.
Oh, okay, no problem. Well,
the-
if you were
the
stringing
radio-
long wire antennas, I would imagine that you were working in high frequency ranges
Well,
in doing that. A lot of cackling on the radio,
no,
static and noise.
No, it was interesting. The CW guys, the Morse guys were copying like crazy.
Okay,
but then my guys, it was a real struggle to get anything. And they're going back and forth with the, on the dial, just hoping to get something. But it was not what you'd call an easy chore.
Right.
But anything they got was recorded. It wasn't something they wrote down or anything. It was all on the wire, on tape. Well, I'm sorry, on wire.
On
Guess
wire.
we
Okay.
didn't have tape recorders then.
Right. Well, wire recorders worked.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
Jack, how did you get the information that was translated and the recordings then that went to Geeson to be interpreted?
Yes,
Okay.
mostly.
Very good.
We had a group called TA, Traffic Analysis. And that's what their chore was. They would take whatever we would get and, do whatever their resources were to try to identify the unit. And perhaps that would be one thing that they would do to see who we were talking to. But the CW guys, the Morse guys, had a little more interesting chore because they had much more traffic to be concerned with,
Well, it's interesting. They're working a lot in code. You were in Germany then for a total of about a year then?
Not even that long.
Not even that long.
I got to Germany in, I believe, April, by way of, they flew us over from Dover, or Westover, I'm sorry, Westover Field. And incidentally, an interesting sidelight, we stopped for a refuel at Lodges Air Force Base in the Azores. And we had a malfunctioning propeller. So we unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, spent 5 days in the Azores in winter uniforms.
Yes.
Which was not good.
But so was this C-54?
Exactly.
Yeah.
C-54, complete with the canvas seats.
Okay.
But anyway, we were there 5 days, then to Rhine-Main and then to Gießen. But I got to Gießen in April. I went up into the British zone in June, come out of the British zone right after the armistice, which was in, I believe, middle to late July. And then by the time I was processed for discharge, I think was until I got out the end of October. So I was from April to October is all the longer I was in Germany. And I loved every minute of it. And I've been back. We've been back, how many times? 3 times? Yeah. We've been back 3 times since, just for vacation.
Well, wonderful. So
Carol's family came from a little village called Moorbach in the Rheinpfalz area.
Right.
And we actually found her great-grandparents' house.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that's great when you can do that.
Yeah, it really is.
Now, have you been back since '89 when the wall came down and able to go into the former East Germany? It's all reunified now.
I never did go East Germany. We spent when we did go, I never even got to Berlin.
Okay.
I mean, so the answer is no. We spent most of our time in after the war, or after we got home, in down around Munich and in Austria. We did a lot of Austria.
Right. So you enjoyed Bavaria and going into Austria. Very good.
Yeah.
You go to Salzburg then and
yes.
Probably Vienna.
And we found we were into ballroom dancing at that time, and we found a beautiful place about 16K from Munich, down around the 5 Lake area. That was just a wonderful place.
Well, wonderful. Well, I certainly enjoyed my time in Germany. I went there flying TDY in in the late 70s flying
Mhm.
C-130s. And then I went back in a staff and then a command position in the late 80s. And I certainly enjoyed Germany, and I've been back a couple times since myself to go
Mhm.
back and see the things. Well, how was your reception when you came home? Armistice in Korea and company grade officer, and you just got a reduction in force early release, and then what?
Then I went to work.
Okay, what kind of work did you do, if you don't mind my asking?
No, no problem. I went into industrial advertising and stayed there for 40 years or something like that. Uh, Part of the time I had my own company out of my fourth bedroom, but I was doing mostly industrial stuff, not consumer advertising, because of the nature of the market here in Pittsburgh.
Oh, of course. Well, how about your reception coming home? I mean, here you are. I assume that short period of time you were still a lieutenant. And how were you received back in Pittsburgh when you came home?
Well, what do you think? Actually, Carol was never able to get to Germany for a variety of reasons. So we didn't see each other for 7 months, 8 months, whatever it was. But interestingly enough, we went to a girlfriend's home during the Christmas holidays. This was like 2 months after I was out. And there was a young man who was at the military academy at West Point. And he ended up with all my good uniforms. So I never even had a uniform on after I got home.
Okay.
But they all went to good use.
Well, wonderful.
I assume he graduated.
Well, I hope so. Well, I'm glad that your close calls were just that.
Yeah, that's all they were.
Stray bullet only pierced the canvas and not your body. That you're able to share your story with us, and it is interesting to see the Russians. When the wall came down, I went into Berlin and into East Berlin, and it was really strange to see the Russian soldiers who were still there, with all the years of the Cold War. Anything else from your military service that you'd like to share?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Is joining the military something that you would recommend to a young person, say about to graduate from high school or graduate from college?
Probably, and it depends on the individual, obviously, because there's some people that the military is top shelf,
Right.
and other times they're not. I was the archetype citizen soldier. I mean, there was never any thought about making the military a career. Excuse me. And I have 4 brothers, and we all served in one way or another, and excluding the one that I think I mentioned to you that was in the Coast Guard. We kid him. But I had a brother, an airborne jumping cook, a helicopter mechanic, a company clerk at you might know that. You know Udorn?
Yes, sir.
He was the company clerk at the air base at Udorn.
Yes, I flew in and out of Udorn many times.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then let's see, I'm a helicopter mechanic and airline mechanic. He never went overseas. He spent his Army time at Camp Rucker fixing helicopters. And then Jay was a Coast Guard. Joel was a cook. That's it.
Well, you and all your brothers served. Well, wonderful.
Yeah.
How about your father? Did you come from a line of family that had served in the military?
Not at all. My dad was a graduate engineer out of Carnegie Tech then, Carnegie Mellon University. Here's a story that's totally unrelated to what we've been talking about. Are you familiar with the biggest upset in the history of college football?
No, sir.
In 1928, Knute Rockne brought Notre Dame to play Carnegie Tech at Forbes Field.
Okay.
And Rockne thought so little, and he was national champion at the time. He thought so little of Carnegie Tech that he turned over the coaching job to his assistants, and he went on to coach or to scout, I think it was NYU or somebody East for the game the next week. And Carnegie Tech beat Notre Dame 19-0.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
my dad was on that. My dad played on that team.
Oh, that was quite an upset. Well, I'm sure your dad was pleased to share that story with you.
Oh yes, forever.
Well,
Yeah.
great.
And he lived to be 87 or 88 years old, and passed away in a hospital. He lived a good life. He was a sales engineer most of the time. And during World War II, he was in what they called a defense industry, supplying and servicing the industrial plants around the greater Pittsburgh and
Right.
West Virginia area. So my mother never did anything militarily or anything except raise 6 kids.
Okay, well, that's great. That's probably the greatest job in the world. Well, Jack, it's just been wonderful to interview you, and I know people are going to enjoy watching this,
Okay.
and so I appreciate you very much.